You're nothing without this family. The world will crush you and you'll come crawling back. Those were the last words my father said before he shoved me out of his truck. I hit the gravel hard. Blood ran down my face. Every breath made my ribs ache. The hot Arizona sun burned above me, uncaring as he drove away without looking back. Hi, I'm Rachel. The last time I saw my father I was 18 years old. Barefoot, bruised, stranded on a lonely highway with no phone, no suitcase and nowhere to go. He left me like I was garbage. What was my crime? I earned a scholarship to Northwestern University. I wanted to study journalism. To him that was unforgivable. He believed women belonged behind a cash register or in a kitchen. Not in college, not chasing dreams and certainly not leaving his town. He called ambition disrespect. When I told him I was leaving anyway he exploded. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I walked until I found a small roadside diner, borrowed a phone and called the police. Not to ask for rescue but to file a report. Assault. Abandonment. I didn't care if he was arrested. I just wanted the truth on record. That was 10 years ago. Now I stood across the street from the same diner where he still worked. Through the window I watched him wiping down a table. He looked older, slower. The faded sign above the entrance hadn't changed. Everhart's Grill. * home style. Family owned. *. I pushed open the door. My heels echoed across the floor. A few elderly customers glanced up before returning to their meals. The air smelled of burnt bacon and bleach. My father didn't even look at me. He tossed a menu onto a nearby table without lifting his eyes. I sat in the booth where we used to eat every Sunday. Back when I was 7. Back before he punished me for dreaming out loud. A young waitress walked over. She couldn't have been older than 22. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes and a fading bruise marked her arm. I recognized that silence. I'd lived inside it once. "Coffee?" she asked softly. I nodded. "What's your name?" "April." I slid one of my business cards across the table. "If you ever need help leaving." I did too. She looked down at the card. Rachel Everhart. Her eyes widened. Before she could speak, a loud crash echoed through the diner. My father had dropped a plate. It shattered across the floor. He stared at the broken pieces as if they had betrayed him. Later, after the lunch crowd disappeared, I walked to the counter. He finally looked at me. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I met his eyes without blinking. "No. You already did." He frowned. For the first time in my life I saw something I had never seen in him before. Fear. He didn't recognize my face. He didn't recognize my voice. But something about me unsettled him. His hands trembled as he reached for a receipt. The same hands that had once struck me without hesitation. "You from around here?" he asked. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly. "Just passing through?" I smiled. "No. I'm here to stay." Silence settled between us. That evening I drove past the house where I grew up. The paint was new but the old porch swing still leaned to one side. I used to hide there after his angry outburst. My mother sat outside, quietly knitting. She looked older. Smaller. When she saw me she paused. For one brief second I thought she recognized me. Instead she stood up, walked inside and closed the door. No smile. No apology. No questions. To her, the daughter they threw away no longer existed. I parked a few blocks away and opened my laptop. Inside a password-protected folder were 10 years of evidence. Hospital records. Photographs of bruises. Police reports. Witness statements. Every document carefully saved. Every date recorded. Every memory impossible to erase. I wasn't back for revenge. Not yet. I came back to finish what I started. To tell the truth. And this time the entire town would hear it. When I pitched the story to my editor I kept it simple. *, a family-owned diner in a small town. A closer look at what really happens behind the smiles. *. She approved it immediately. But this wasn't just another assignment. It was my chance to take back my voice. I rented a small apartment 2 miles from the diner and began visiting every day. Notebook in hand. Listening more than talking. Most customers praised my father. "He tells it like it is. Good man. Hard worker." People described my mother as sweet but quiet. No one ever asked what happened to their daughter. No one even remembered I existed. Over the next few weeks, April slowly began trusting me. She admitted my father became cruel whenever the diner was empty. Sometimes he grabbed her wrist when she made a mistake. Sometimes he shouted until she cried. She confessed something that made my stomach turn. Her stepfather was my father. I saw the same fear in her eyes that I had carried for years. The same silent plea for someone, anyone, to notice. One evening I invited her out for coffee. We sat across from each other in silence. Finally I looked her in the eyes. "I'm his daughter," I said quietly. "The one who disappeared." Her lips began to shake. "He told everyone you ran away," she whispered. "He said you were using drugs. Then he said you died." I leaned closer, keeping my voice calm. "No. I just stopped letting him decide who I was." Tears rolled silently down April's face. She didn't sob. She didn't make a sound. It looked like she had spent years teaching herself not to cry where anyone could see. "I thought I was losing my mind," she whispered. "Sometimes I convinced myself it wasn't really that bad." I reached into my bag and pulled out an old photograph. I was 17. A black eye. A split lip. Standing in an emergency room while a nurse gently held my arm. I'd never shown that picture to anyone. Not even the police. But April needed to see it. I placed it in front of her. "You're not crazy," I said softly. "They are." She stared at the photo for a long moment before nodding. It looked painful, as if she was finally allowing herself to believe the truth. The next morning my story was published. It filled the front page of the weekend newspaper. "The quiet monster behind the counter. A daughter returns to Everhart's Grill." I used a pen name. There was no photo. No names. But every quote came directly from people in town. I pieced together years of whispered stories, hidden memories, and uncomfortable truths. I wrote about the abuse without saying it had happened to me. Instead, I described it as something witnessed by someone close. It was enough. Enough to make people question what they thought they knew. By lunchtime, half the diner was empty. By dinner, local reporters had picked up the story. Social media exploded. People started remembering old bruises. Harsh insults. Explosive tempers. Moments they had ignored for years. Just before midnight my phone buzzed. One message. One word. "Thank you." It was from April. 2 days later I returned to the diner. My father stood outside with an unlit cigarette between his fingers. A crumpled copy of my article was clenched in his hand. He scanned every face that passed by, searching for someone to blame. I sat quietly on a bench across the street with a cup of coffee. He never noticed me. Just as he had never truly seen me my entire life. His hands shook. Then suddenly he exploded. He threw the newspaper onto the sidewalk. He stomped on it. And again. It wasn't anger. It was panic. The town no longer admired him. The image he had spent decades building was falling apart. That evening another message arrived from April. This time it was a photograph. A screenshot of her resignation letter. Beneath it was a bus ticket to Chicago. She had done it. She was leaving. She had even found temporary housing through a women's shelter. "I never knew how to live outside his world," she wrote. "But now I do." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "You're stronger than you know." As I pressed send I realized something. Maybe I was too. For the first time in years I looked in the mirror. And didn't look away. The diner closed for 2 days. Officially it was for maintenance. Everyone knew better. Customers stopped coming. Neighbors whispered. A local radio host discussed my article on the air. "People think abuse always sounds like screaming," she said. "But sometimes it's silence, constant, controlled, and suffocating." Little by little the town was waking up. A few days later I walked into the city clerk's office carrying a folder full of documents. When I mentioned the name Everhart, the clerk immediately looked up. After checking the records she frowned. The business license wasn't in my father's name. It belonged to my mother. She was still listed as the legal owner. Even worse, the business taxes hadn't been paid in 3 years. Small towns can keep secrets. Government records usually don't. I wasn't chasing revenge. I simply wanted the law to do its job. Within days, Everhart's Grill was officially under audit. When I drove past the diner again, the windows were covered. A bright yellow legal notice was taped to the front door. Seized for unpaid taxes. My father stood outside yelling into his phone, desperate and furious. I walked right past him. He never recognized me. This time, I smiled. Not because he had lost, but because I no longer carried his power. My next stop wasn't the diner. It was the bus station. April stood there holding one worn suitcase. She looked terrified. But underneath the fear was something new. Hope. I almost stayed, she admitted quietly. But you didn't, I said with a smile. And that's what matters. I helped her settle into a small apartment. It wasn't fancy. The paint was chipped. The furniture was old. But every inch of it belonged to her. We opened her first checking account. Updated her resume. Transferred her phone into her own name. I introduced her to a women's support organization that had once helped me rebuild my own life. For a week, I slept on her couch while we started over together. The morning I left, she hugged me tightly. Like the big sister she'd never had. Maybe in some small way. I had become exactly that. I never returned to my hometown. I didn't need to. 6 months later, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. April stood behind the counter of a cozy cafe, smiling brighter than I'd ever seen. On the back she had written, "Manager now. Got my first paycheck. Bought myself new shoes. And a mirror. I don't flinch anymore." I held the picture in my hands for a long time. Then I smiled. I never needed an apology. I never needed them to admit what they had done. Because in the end, I became the woman they tried so hard to break. And that was the greatest victory of all.